Everyone wants peace in Ukraine, but if everyone wants it, why hasn't it been achieved yet? Is it that they don't really want it? Or is the issue more complex than it appears? Here, we're not just talking about the Russian side and the American side. Absolutely. All the countries involved, whether directly or indirectly in this conflict, when it comes time to sign the final document, will necessarily have to face a number of very significant risks. War is an extremely expensive endeavor, but the truth is that peace is no less costly. And here we are precisely to explain why the final document has not yet been signed, which is the same as saying what disadvantages and therefore risks each side faces. And who's most affected? Big surprise. Whatever the conditions of the future peace agreement may be, they are not in Russia, nor in the United States, nor, of course, in Ukraine, but in the European Union. Yes, that's exactly why they're doing so much to try to prevent what we should all understand as inevitable. Inevitable and supposedly the most desired outcome, but once again, not by everyone equally. Stay until the end of this video, because there you'll discover how peace in Ukraine could bring war to the European Union. And no, we're not talking about the Russian Federation, included in the same. Let's begin before we continue. Very important announcement. We are reorganizing the whole channel. We are going to relaunch the Members Community tab in December. While waiting for these amazing perks that we are preparing especially for you, can you start joining this channel's community? Which I will be infinitely grateful for, because the truth is that we need it now more than ever. Thank you for your support. Let's continue with the video and start from the beginning as usual. Right now is precisely when those peace negotiations are taking place, which hopefully will end up leading to it. Supposedly between Russia and Ukraine, but actually the United States and oddly even the European Union are involved for reasons still unknown. Well, actually all the parties already know it for sure. They have been very involved in the conflict, especially the Western side, long before. In fact, it even began here on this very channel. We already explained the history of it, which, oh, surprise. It doesn't actually date back to 2022, but at the very least, we should mention 2014 as the beginning of Western preparations to, in fact, eventually wage war against the Russian Federation. Negotiations are at their most intense, occurring in several countries simultaneously, but results are still pending. And we could even say to abolish peace. It's true that it isn't achieved quickly or easily, but it's also true that it isn't happening because there are too many parties working so that the European Union at this moment is in the situation the European Union is in, and the European Union right now is in the same situation as the European Union, and that the Union at this moment is in the same situation as Europe, and that the Union at this very moment is in the same situation as Europe, and that the Union at this very moment is in the same situation as the European Union, and the Union at this moment is in the same situation as the Union, in this, the same situation as the European Union. First of all, we have the Russian Federation and the risks that this country faces. Although there aren't too many, here we are going to mention in particular the two main ones, which are deep enough to be taken into consideration. The first of them has to do with diplomatic shifts. We could even say the shifts or the constant mood changes on the part of the United States, or the attempts to deceive the Russian Federation, both from that country and, of course, from the European Union. From the White House, of course, they will try to convince the Russian Federation that a compromise is indeed the most necessary thing to achieve at this very moment. Basically, they will try to sell a defeat or a signed capitulation by a country that, in fact, is currently winning the war militarily. Yes, I know what you'll say. If Russia continues like this, the war could last over 100 years. That's an outright lie they've repeatedly tried to spread in Western media. But once the Ukrainian defense lines start to fall, which is actually already happening in several regions of the country, victory could be much closer. Come on, not even a year will pass before the Russian Federation ends up reaching it. And besides, it doesn't matter how long it takes, because as long as you are effectively winning on the ground, which is, I repeat, exactly what is happening right now. And above all, especially like in the case of Russia, if you have planned this operation as a war of attrition, that is, for the long term. Therefore, you are prepared for whatever may come, since you can basically take as much time as needed What you can't do, however, is precisely where the issue lies. One of the most important dangers for the Russian Federation is losing the territories you already control, and to control which you have had to spend an enormous amount of resources, especially in terms of human lives. Let's see, how do you explain to your population that now we control the territory of several regions of Ukraine beyond those we have already included? Our constitution, but we'll have to leave most of them because potatoes? Yes, that's true. If you exchange a territory you control for one you don't yet, for example, the territory controlled in Sumeos for the territory of Gerson. An agreement is still possible, even with the Russian Federation. I'm convinced of it. As a geopolitical analyst, she will have her very serious reservations there. But what is intended from the West, and in this particular case, from the United States, is not at all what they really want. And that's how they've tried to sell it countless times, both to Russia and to the whole world. It's that the Federation Army receives as a reward for indeed winning on the battlefield those regions that today it already controls or whose control by it is absolutely imminent. Mr. Putin, you have been at war for about 4 years with the entire country of Russia, supporting the army, taking territory kilometer by kilometer that used to belong to Ukraine. And because you are winning right now on the battlefield, we are going to offer you a reward that you simply won't be able to refuse. What did he say? What's going on? Is this man crazy, right? No, Mr. Putin? What's going on? Of course not, and even less the territory of all of Ukraine. I know you never wanted it, but just talking, since in the West we really like to talk. What do you think? If for everything you're controlling right now on the battlefield and that has cost you so much to achieve, we give you, for example, the city of Donetsk. Well, okay, today we're feeling especially generous. Let it be Donetsk-Luhansk, and I think they will end up being Donetsk-Luhansk. And what about this wonderful loaf of bread? How can you refuse? It's a French baguette and a lawyer. Emmanuel, prepare your horse. Are we going to war against Putin? Secondly, in addition to the military or military diplomatic risk, whichever you prefer, we must necessarily add the economic risk, which are, of course, the much desired assets by everyone, especially by the Russian Federation itself, of course, the frozen Russian assets that are currently in the European Union. They have tried to steal them countless times, and still, because of all the risks and consequences involved, they have not dared to do it. But what happens when it comes to the peace plan or the final peace agreement? I'll go further, even if it's fully signed. That is when the Russian Federation has already accepted and it has been signed by hand by its president, Vladimir Putin, that there will be no more fighting and no more military confrontations. If Russia signs the same document as the European Union, it should get those assets back, which in fact would even be absurd to sign because it's already supposed to be part of what they negotiated at the time when they kept those assets. That is when the special military operation wasn't even on the table yet. That's how international law works. Monetary matters shouldn't mix with politics or military affairs, or at least if the European Union wants to make sure it still has a reputation as a minimally reliable partner. But the truth is that neither the European Union nor the United States nor NATO in general have ever been that. So Russia simply can't trust that side. But it definitely has to trust that side if what it wants is to reach a peace agreement as soon as possible. And once the agreement is signed, basically two things can happen. The European Union and the United States can fulfill what was agreed and indeed respect the law and return Russia's money. Or they can continue with the same old tricks because certainly it wouldn't be the first time they've done it. So indeed, they could seize these things that everyone wants so much. I repeat, assets of the Russian Federation, and in this sense, they wouldn't have to do much at all, just keep the Russian assets and enjoy them. Well, dedicate them to the supposed reconstruction of Ukraine, but here, I think everyone understands what the reality will be. When we say reconstruction of Ukraine, we actually mean the well-being of the political countries and the Western elites. Please and thank you, come in, surrender, and leave your 140 billion here. On the Russian side, of course, in these kinds of circumstances, there wouldn't be much to do. That means attacking the European Union militarily and confronting NATO, Article 5. Something Russia has repeatedly claimed they have not wanted, do not want, and likely will not want, unless the threat comes precisely from that same European Union. But does it have to be a military threat then? If the United States does it, more of the same? You're not going to launch a nuclear attack on a country that has kept your money. Yes, it's annoying, but the response would be very disproportionate. In the eyes, of course, of the entire international community, not to mention the consequences that your response, not their action, could have. Unfair, yes, extremely so, but just like the world itself. But of course, Russia is by no means the only country facing very serious risks when it comes to moving toward a possible, hopefully, peace agreement in Ukraine. The United States also faces them, and here we will also distinguish two main risks. One of an external nature, that is, regarding the international community, and the other of a purely internal nature. But this time, not within the United States itself, but of an internal nature within Ukraine. On one hand, the fact that Russia ultimately refuses to sign a peace agreement, the terms of which do not convince it in the slightest, and continues with what it was already doing on the battlefield, that is, advancing steadily and controlling more and more territory within Ukraine. The United States would very likely have to face an escalation of tension in the region, because as soon as the Ukrainian defensive lines are advancing, about to break, or begin to crack securely in at least 3 or 4 directions at once, Russia will most likely want to step on the accelerator. And that would not only leave the United States exposed in front of the entire international community, it would damage its reputation, make it lose resources it already has half committed throughout Ukraine, and force it to face the situation. Absolutely inconceivable for the White House until now that Russia could reach not only Kherson, but directly to Kyiv, which, considering how things are developing on the ground, is by no means a foolish possibility. And to all this, of course, we still have to add the Venezuelan issue, because most likely, one of the main reasons why the United States is so eager to make a deal with Russia and Ukraine right now is precisely because it wants to free its hands a bit to intervene in another conflict that, in fact, is about to begin in that very same country. Yes, Venezuela and the United States would also eventually confront the Russian Federation. And we've already made several very detailed videos about this on this same channel. But the interests that Washington has in Venezuela and those it has in Ukraine are by no means comparable. Not the interests, potential gains, or Donald Trump's desire to keep getting involved in different issues. The Ukrainian conflict is clearly, even in media terms, in free fall. So it's in their best interest to get rid of it as soon as possible. And if Russia prevents them from doing so and actually does it because of the conditions they're trying to impose on them, then it will be quite a nuisance for them. Not just their international reputation, but basically their entire foreign policy. On the other hand, we have the internal issue within Ukraine. And the thing is, the United States wouldn't want to just leave Ukraine like that, just like that. But of course, making sure all its interests within that country are well protected. And in this case, after Volodymyr Zelensky, there would have to be another figure under control coming straight from the White House. Yes, once again with Zelensky. It's already quite complicated for them because, yes, he was indeed under the control of the White House, but now he is more under the control of the United Kingdom. And the thing is, the White House, which had quite a bit of power over the current Ukrainian leader, was the previous one, the Biden administration. This, in fact, is one of the main reasons why Zelensky is not liked at all within the Trump administration. They know perfectly well that he actually campaigned for the opposing side, and most likely they still want to make him pay for it. Be that as it may, it's very clear that Zelensky will have to be replaced by the White House itself. It has been repeatedly confirmed after the final signing of a peace agreement between the parties. There will have to be elections in Ukraine in about 90 to 100 days, but who will be elected is one of the key points of the matter.
Will there be elections? The plan says quite clearly that Ukraine must have elections in 100 days. You can likely get there in about 90 days, according to people I've talked to.
So, by setting up another electoral process in the so free and democratic Ukraine, the United States risks that a supposed partner of the West might end up getting ahead of them. It's still unclear whether it will be from the right or left. Here we are talking very specifically about the United Kingdom, which, with all these peace agreements, has actually remained quieter than anyone else. British soldiers, however, have been showing up in the betting pools, particularly in Emmanuel Macron's, who now, like a modern-day Napoleon, is gathering his small army in Europe. We are going to stop Russia and secure peace in Ukraine, and we will do it. The French, the Turks, and the British. But that's what Emmanuel Macron, the Frenchman, says. The British say nothing. This silence may, in fact, be precisely due to the organization of other plans, let's say. A bit behind on the part of the United Kingdom, which has one of the main political assets of independent Ukraine. That is, anything that has to do, even minimally, with Russian culture and therefore directly with the Russian Federation, of course. Valery Zaluzhny is indeed the former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian army. Nothing controlled by Washington, especially lately, and on the contrary, practically everything is controlled by London. For a reason, right now, he is the ambassador of Ukraine in that country. And what if Zelensky's lack of real sympathy toward the White House has to do with the color of the administration, that is practically on a personal level, with Donald Trump? The little regard Valery Zaluzhny has for what is ordered from Washington is, let's say, timeless and even unconditional. One of the clearest examples of this is, in fact, the famous Ukrainian counteroffensive in the summer of 2023. The United States was pushing for this hard, which they wanted to happen much earlier, but Valery Zaluzhny did not carry out until he met with the British side, the BOF Valery Zaluzhny. In addition, he is very well liked by the majority of the Ukrainian population, as well as by the soldiers in his army. That is, he could end up being one of the key figures that the United Kingdom would use when it comes to controlling whatever is left of Ukraine. That is out of the hands of the Russian Federation, as well as to try to sabotage any agreements that might have been attempted. In this way, Valery Zaluzhny could directly influence the high command of the Ukrainian army when it comes to refusing to demilitarize the country as the Russian side demands. Could he question Ukraine's future neutral status, both in terms of not joining NATO and in terms of not directly confronting, once again, the Russian Federation? Another important aspect regarding Russia signing the Washington proposed agreement. By not doing either directly, Valery Zaluzhny could, for example, just slow everything down as much as possible. These same processes that both Russia and the United States need to take place within Ukraine. In short, the United States, with all this democratic show, is facing a situation in which the money will already have been spent, but real political control over Ukraine will be far from achieved. Finally, thirdly, we have reached the point, if not the most important, certainly the most interesting in this whole equation, the European Union. And Ukraine, what about it? Where are Ukraine's risks? Ukraine, regardless of its statements or risks, faces the truth. It's not an independent country. It's not a sovereign country. It can't make decisions on its own. So here we're going to stick to the harsh reality. And therefore, let's talk about the risks for one of the parties that can still somehow influence what happens in Ukraine, the European Union. The most logical risk, and perhaps the most obvious in this case, is obviously related to the economy, especially if we take into account the recent cases of corruption that have emerged throughout Ukrainian territory and have involved figures at the highest level. Here we are talking about government ministers who have already been removed from their positions and some of whom are already out of the country, having fled the country before this very dismissal took place. That is to say, according to what the multiple ongoing investigations suggest, Ukraine may have been used by the European Union as a huge money laundering machine, and therefore signing peace would mean losing control over those monetary flows. Of course, they will try by any means to get their hands on the reconstruction funds, for which they are also trying to use that now overused money from the frozen assets of the Russian Federation. But if the agreement proposed by the American side is signed, they would most likely end up controlling that particular money as well. Well, that money and any other kind. The United States proposes, the United States commands. Yes, the so-called peace council that Donald Trump wants to set up hurts a lot. It's annoying. And how? After all, we're talking about huge amounts of money, but this is by no means the most important point. Well, if this peace agreement in Ukraine between Russia and the United States were to be signed, the European Union. As a consequence, it could be facing an entire war, but not a war against the Russian Federation, as Western media constantly tries to sell us, but rather a civil war. And the thing is, within this peace agreement, Vladimir Zelensky's departure from the government will definitely be included. Therefore, a change within the Ukrainian political power. And as a consequence of that, the need for all those who were occupying the most important seats in Ukraine and therefore the closest ones to all kinds of corruption, including those related to the European Union. They need to receive some kind of security guarantee. This, in fact, is one of the main reasons that many geopolitical analysts cite when explaining why. Vladimir Zelensky still hasn't fully agreed to the American requests. He still hasn't signed peace with the Russian Federation because he desperately needs those security guarantees for himself, for his family, and for all his close associates. Security guarantees that the United States, of course, could offer him, but in exchange for basically anything. And here we could very specifically mention information about key issues within the Ukrainian country. That, of course, yes, but the United States, represented by the Trump administration lately, doesn't exactly have the best relationship with the European Union. Donald Trump appears to hold a grudge against several leaders of that organization for having supported the opposing side countless times in elections within the United States. This war, therefore, is not just between Russia and Ukraine, supposedly, of course, but also, and very particularly, Donald Trump's war against many of the leaders of the European Union. And what better opportunity than this one to achieve both goals at the same time? Taking control of Ukraine on one hand and eliminating those who he dislikes so much and who he believes have done him so much harm, all in one single blow. Vladimir Zelensky could thus be required in exchange for those security guarantees. He would have to give the names of everyone who has somehow been involved in the corruption that is now plaguing Ukraine. And the moment those names are made public, it is understood that the corruption would no longer just plague Ukraine, but would end up affecting the entire European Union. Whether it involves the entire European Union or most member countries, the scandal could reach biblical proportions. The consequences of it could shake the very foundations of all of Europe. Massive divisions, loss of citizens' trust in institutions, massive protests, and depending on how far things go, practically a civil war. One or more, depending on which countries are affected and how much. Because while the conflict in Ukraine is advancing, the situation is also progressing in many countries of the European Union, and not exactly in any positive direction. Problems with immigration, problems also in social terms, and a lack of money for those same social purposes. Nothing is built or done. That's the impression that many citizens of those same countries have, that their tax money ends up being taken and given directly to Ukraine. If on top of this, it turns out that most of that money doesn't even reach that country, just imagine the chaos that could break out in each of the donor countries. And on top of this, there would be yet another reason to add. And the thing is, if Ukraine is taken out of the equation, the European Union, especially if it continues with this very warlike rhetoric against the Russian Federation, will necessarily have to face, excuse the redundancy, the need to reinforce its borders. Yes, we're discussing NATO's eastern flank in Russia after the Ukrainian conflict ends. And precisely, having already seen enough of that warlike rhetoric from the European Union towards its own population, and therefore towards its own security, it will do the same almost immediately. Russia allocates much larger amounts to defense, has much more experience, and most importantly, it is a single country. Whereas when we talk about the European Union, we are talking, at least at this very moment, about 27. In summary, as we've just seen, peace brings benefits and positive outcomes, but also risks and drawbacks. So, what is being decided right now in those seemingly endless negotiations? It's not just about who will be the winning side and who, therefore, will be the losing side, but above all and more than anything, which side will face the greatest risks and, therefore, which side will pay the highest price.